Friends, there have been a series of new developments which directly affect those following the carnivore diet, especially those with a history of chronic health conditions and ailments. With the unprecedented adoption and adoration of the carnivore diet among the masses, big food and big pharma are going really crazy these days. They just don't seem to accept that individuals can shun off their expensive lifelong meds and can lead a healthy life just by following a purely natural carnivore lifestyle, primarily eating meat, butter, and eggs. The huge financial loss caused by carnivore followers to these evil corporations have prompted these entities toward some extremely desperate measures, with an aim to pull as many individuals back into the zone of suffering and sickness. From the change in diagnosis threshold of the most commonly prevailing and deadly chronic health condition, to the disturbing revelation of how the treatment of this condition pushes us towards another lifelong chronic condition, there is something at the end which has given a little hope to the ones following this journey of recovery and rejuvenation. There is a lot packed in this exclusive video, which must be taken into account by those conscious about their health and well-being. So, let's begin. The first development we have is really crucial, as it is related to something most of us carnivore followers have gone through in our lives. Yes, it is blood pressure, or hypertension as some of us call it. And the crazy thing is that even if you have recovered from your existing BP condition by following the carnivore diet, now you could be declared sick again with no change in your key health markers, and the health system would push you towards taking the meds once again, no matter how good you feel as of now. Yes, it sounds bizarre, but this is the way it is. And here are the details we must know.
To fully understand the magnitude of what has just occurred with the new BP guidelines, we must first examine exactly what has changed and what it means for millions of us.
Friends, the 2025 American Heart Association blood pressure guidelines have redefined the categories of blood pressure classification in ways that will reshape the lives of countless individuals. Under the new system, normal blood pressure is defined as less than 120/80. Elevated blood pressure is now 120 to 129 systolic, with diastolic less than 80. Stage 1 hypertension begins at 130 to 139 systolic or 80 to 89 diastolic. Stage 2 hypertension is anything at or above 140/90. But here is where the trap springs shut. The overarching treatment goal is now less than 130/80 millimeters of mercury for all adults. This means that anyone with blood pressure readings consistently at or above this threshold is now considered a candidate for pharmaceutical intervention. The guidelines recommend that adults with hypertension who also have diabetes, chronic kidney disease, or an estimated cardiovascular disease risk of 7.5% or greater should begin medication immediately when blood pressure reaches 130/80. For those at lower risk, a brief 3 to 6 months trial of lifestyle interventions is suggested before starting drugs. But the ultimate goal remains the same: get that number below 130/80 by any means necessary. In fact, the practical implications are staggering. When the 2017 guidelines first lowered the hypertension threshold from 140/90 to 130/80, approximately 31 million Americans were instantly reclassified as hypertensive overnight. These were individuals who went to bed with normal blood pressure and woke up with a medical diagnosis requiring treatment. The 2025 guidelines doubled down on this approach, emphasizing aggressive pharmaceutical treatment to achieve the 130/80 target across all adult populations. This is particularly devastating for older adults, where blood pressure naturally increases with age as part of normal physiological adaptation. A blood pressure of 135/85 in a 70-year-old may be entirely appropriate and associated with optimal health outcomes. Yet under these guidelines, this individual is now classified as hypertensive and targeted for medication. The side effects of aggressive blood pressure lowering in elderly patients are well documented and include dizziness, falls, fractures, weakness, fatigue, kidney dysfunction, and dangerous electrolyte imbalances. When we overtreat blood pressure in pursuit of an arbitrary numerical target, we risk causing more harm than benefit, particularly in populations where slightly elevated blood pressure may actually be protective. Likewise, the economic implications reveal the true motivation behind these guidelines. Each newly diagnosed hypertensive patient represents a lifetime customer for the pharmaceutical industry. If we conservatively estimate that 30 to 40 million additional Americans are now classified as requiring blood pressure medication, and the average cost of antihypertensive medications ranges from $20 to $100 per month, we are looking at an additional $7.2 billion to $48 billion in annual pharmaceutical revenue. This does not include the costs of additional doctor visits, monitoring, laboratory tests, and management of medication side effects. And here lies the cruelty of this system. These medications do not cure hypertension. They do not reverse the underlying disease. They merely suppress the symptom, the elevated number on the blood pressure cuff, while the metabolic dysfunction driving that elevation continues to worsen beneath the surface. It is the equivalent of disconnecting the warning light on your car's dashboard while the engine continues to overheat. The light is off, the number looks better, but the problem remains and the damage accelerates. This is not medicine aimed at healing. This is medicine designed to create and maintain customers. And to understand why this system persists, we must examine the elephant in the room that these guidelines refuse to acknowledge, the true root cause of hypertension.
Let's now examine what these new guidelines conspicuously fail to address: the primary underlying cause of essential hypertension in the vast majority of cases.
The new blood pressure guidelines, spanning hundreds of pages, focus extensively on measurement techniques, medication algorithms, and treatment targets. They discuss salt intake, exercise recommendations, and stress management. What they conspicuously fail to adequately address is the fundamental metabolic dysfunction driving elevated blood pressure in modern populations: insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a condition in which the body cells become less responsive to the hormone insulin, which is responsible for facilitating glucose entry into cells for energy. When cells become resistant to insulin signals, the pancreas compensates by producing more and more insulin, leading to chronically elevated insulin levels in the bloodstream, a state called hyperinsulinemia. This is not a minor metabolic quirk. It is a fundamental derangement that affects virtually every system in the body, and it is the primary driver of what we call metabolic syndrome, the cluster of conditions including obesity, type 2 diabetes, elevated triglycerides, low HDL cholesterol, and yes, hypertension. The scientific literature documenting the relationship between insulin resistance and hypertension is extensive and unequivocal. Research published in the journal Biomedicines in 2023 comprehensively reviewed the mechanisms by which insulin resistance drives elevated blood pressure. The pathways are multiple and synergistic, creating a perfect storm of cardiovascular dysfunction. First, hyperinsulinemia directly increases sodium and water reabsorption in the kidneys, particularly in the proximal tubules. Insulin essentially tells the kidneys to hold on to salt and water, expanding blood volume and raising pressure within the arterial system. This is not a minor effect. It is a primary mechanism by which elevated insulin drives hypertension. Second, elevated insulin levels stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, the body's fight or flight response. It increases heart rate, causes vasoconstriction, narrowing of blood vessels, and elevates cardiac output. All of these contribute to higher blood pressure. It is as if the body is in a constant state of stress, with the accelerator pressed down and no ability to relax. Third, insulin resistance impairs the production of nitric oxide, a critical molecule that causes blood vessels to relax and dilate. When nitric oxide production is compromised, blood vessels remain constricted, increasing vascular resistance and blood pressure. This endothelial dysfunction is one of the earliest signs of cardiovascular disease, and it is driven directly by insulin resistance. Fourth, insulin resistance activates the renin-angiotensin and aldosterone system, or RAS, a hormonal system that regulates blood pressure and fluid balance. When activated inappropriately, it causes vasoconstriction and sodium retention, both of which elevate blood pressure. This is the same system targeted by ACE inhibitors and ARBs, two of the most commonly prescribed classes of blood pressure medications. Yet these drugs merely block the system's effects without addressing why it is activated in the first place: insulin resistance. Fifth, insulin resistance is associated with visceral obesity, fat accumulation around the organs. This visceral fat is not inert. It is metabolically active and releases pro-inflammatory molecules called adipokines, including tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-6, resistin, and leptin. These inflammatory mediators contribute to vascular dysfunction, atherosclerosis, and hypertension. The inflammation is not a side effect, it is central to the disease process. The evidence is overwhelming. Studies have consistently shown that approximately 50% of individuals with hypertension are insulin resistant, and the prevalence is even higher in those with obesity or metabolic syndrome. Insulin resistance is not merely associated with hypertension, it is causal. It is the engine driving the blood pressure elevation. Yet the new guidelines treat blood pressure as if it were a simple plumbing problem, too much pressure in the pipes, rather than addressing the metabolic dysfunction generating that pressure in the first place. This is analogous to treating a fever with ice baths while ignoring the underlying infection. Yes, you can lower the temperature, but you have done nothing to address the cause. Similarly, antihypertensive medications can lower blood pressure numbers, but they do not reverse insulin resistance. They do not heal the metabolic dysfunction. They simply mask the symptom while the underlying disease continues to progress. And here is where the story becomes even sinister, because the question we must now ask is what causes insulin resistance in the first place? And the answer points directly back to the disaster engineered over the past half-century.
To fully understand why insulin resistance has become epidemic and why hypertension now affects nearly half of us all, we must examine the real fuel driving this crisis. And then we'll move to the shocking new study findings, which reveals how Big Pharma creates the need for one highly expensive med from another one, keeping us trapped in this vicious cycle of dependency.
Friends, the root cause of the insulin resistance epidemic is nothing other than the catastrophic transformation of the human diet over the past century, orchestrated by big food and enabled by flawed government guidelines. What we eat today bears almost no resemblance to the foods that sustained human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. The tragedy began in the mid-20th century, when influential figures like Ancel Keys aggressively promoted the idea that saturated fats and red meat were the villains behind heart disease. This diet heart hypothesis, though weakly supported and riddled with methodological flaws, was elevated to near dogma by government guidelines, medical institutions, and food companies eager to seize the opportunity. Natural, nutrient-rich animal foods that had sustained humanity for millennia were vilified, while the food industry filled the vacuum with cheap, engineered substitutes, refined grains, vegetable oils, margarine, and sugar-laden processed goods. What was sold as progress and heart-healthy eating was in reality the opening of the floodgates to metabolic ruin. The biochemical damage of these products is now undeniable. Refined carbohydrates and sugars flood the bloodstream with glucose multiple times per day, forcing the pancreas into overdrive and gradually driving insulin resistance. When we consume high-carbohydrate meals, breakfast cereal, bread, pasta, rice, fruit juice, soda, we subject ourselves to constant insulin stimulation. Over time, the cells become desensitized to insulin's signal. They become resistant. The pancreas responds by producing even more insulin, creating a vicious cycle of escalating insulin levels and worsening resistance. Industrial seed oils, rich in unstable omega-6 fats, integrate into cell membranes and lipoproteins where they oxidize easily, creating toxic byproducts that inflame arteries and transform LDL cholesterol into its most dangerous form, oxidized LDL. Over time, this sparks endothelial dysfunction, the first step in plaque buildup and cardiovascular disease. Trans fats, introduced as heart-healthy replacements for butter and animal fat, turned out to be even more damaging. They not only elevate LDL and suppress protective HDL, but also deform cholesterol particles into rigid structures that embed deeply into artery walls. Add to this the endless preservatives, stabilizers, emulsifiers, and flavor enhancers used in ultra-processed foods, and the picture becomes clear. This is not nourishment. This is a toxic cocktail designed for corporate profit, shelf life, and addictiveness. It distorts lipid metabolism, fuels chronic inflammation, disrupts gut health, overloads the liver, and drives insulin resistance. The result is an epidemic of obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, cardiovascular disease, and yes, hypertension. Epidemics that were not accidents, but the predictable outcome of a dietary revolution that demonized real food and replaced it with industrial products. By the time the damage shows up in blood tests, waistlines, and blood pressure readings, the trap is already sprung. People, convinced they were following science and heart-healthy guidelines, are left sick,
dependent, and primed for the next stage of the cycle, where Big Pharma enters with its promised solutions. And this is exactly what we are going to expose next in the most crucial section of this video. But before we move ahead, we would like to know which diet plan are you currently following and how has been your experience so far? Have you had healing of any existing health issues? Do share in the comments.
By the 1980s, the damage from ultra-processed foods had already begun to reshape public health. Rates of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease were climbing at alarming rates, and people desperately needed answers. But instead of questioning the flawed nutritional guidelines that demonized red meat and natural fats while promoting industrial products, the medical establishment doubled down. And into this environment stepped Big Pharma, armed with a drug that would go on to become the most prescribed medication in history: statins. When statins were first introduced, they were sold as nothing less than miracle pills. Doctors were told that by lowering LDL cholesterol, branded bad cholesterol, these drugs would save millions of lives from heart attacks and strokes. Patients were promised a simple safeguard in pill form: take your statin each night and your heart will be safe. Over time, statins became the cornerstone of modern cardiology, prescribed to tens of millions of people worldwide, many of whom would remain on them for life. The logic behind them was simple, almost too simple. Statins inhibit HMG-CoA reductase, the key enzyme in the liver responsible for cholesterol production. By lowering LDL cholesterol, the reasoning went, cardiovascular risk would drop. This message was repeated endlessly at medical conferences, in glossy pharmaceutical advertising, and even woven into official treatment guidelines. LDL reduction became not just a medical goal, but a near-religious pursuit. Few dared to question what else these drugs might be doing inside the body. And yet, whispers of trouble persisted. Patients reported muscle pain, fatigue, foggy memory, even rising blood sugar. These concerns were often brushed aside as anecdotal or rare, and the illusion of safety was carefully maintained. That facade began to crack in early 2024 when a groundbreaking study appeared in Cell Metabolism. A team of researchers in China dared to ask the question mainstream cardiology had long avoided: could statins themselves be undermining the body's metabolic health in ways that explained their long-observed connection to diabetes? The answer was chilling. Over the course of 16 weeks, patients treated with atorvastatin showed the expected reductions in LDL and total cholesterol. But that was only half the story. Alongside these changes, fasting glucose crept higher, insulin levels rose, HbA1c, the gold standard for long-term blood sugar control, climbed significantly in just 4 weeks. Insulin resistance worsened. And perhaps most damning of all, levels of GLP-1, the body's natural hormone for stabilizing post-meal blood sugar, plummeted. This was no minor shift. GLP-1 is one of the body's key metabolic safeguards. Secreted by specialized cells in the intestine after meals, it signals the pancreas to release insulin, suppresses glucagon, slows gastric emptying, and even tells the brain when to stop eating. In essence, it keeps the metabolic system balanced after food intake. Suppress GLP-1 and the entire system begins to break down. The study revealed that statins blunt this crucial hormone, leaving patients more insulin resistant and more vulnerable to type 2 diabetes. It is the equivalent of cutting the brakes on a car. You can still accelerate, but you've lost the ability to control the speed. The researchers didn't stop at documenting the effect, they traced it back to its roots. Statins, it turns out, alter the gut microbiome, particularly reducing beneficial Clostridium species. These bacteria help convert primary bile acids into ursodeoxycholic acid, which plays a pivotal role in stimulating GLP-1 secretion. With fewer Clostridium, there was less UDCA, and therefore less GLP-1. In simple terms, statins reshaped the gut in a way that choked off the body's ability to regulate glucose properly. The implications are enormous. For years, doctors knew statins increased the risk of diabetes, but the explanation was vague, almost brushed aside. This study proved it was not a rare or incidental side effect. It was a direct, mechanistic consequence of how these drugs operate in the body. Patients who thought they were protecting their hearts were in fact being nudged down the path toward diabetes, a disease that itself accelerates cardiovascular death. In trying to solve one problem, the medical system was fueling another.
Friends, before we move ahead, we would like to know, how has been your experience on the carnivore diet so far? Which health conditions have you managed to heal? Did you face any problems while starting or later on? And do you have any tips and suggestions for other carnivore followers? Do share in the comments. And here we have a little request. Subscribe to our channel, Carnivore Squad, helping us spread the healing message further.
Nick Norwitz, a Harvard-trained PhD and Oxford researcher, is one of the first to speak openly about this study. In a very recent, widely circulated commentary on his YouTube channel, he explains that the degree of GLP-1 suppression observed, sometimes nearly 50%, is catastrophic. This is not a subtle biomarker shift. It is rather a profound biological disruption, enough to cripple glucose regulation in real-world patients. Cholesterol numbers might look good on paper, he warns, but at the cost of insulin resistance and hormonal imbalance, the long-term outcome is grim. And here lies the cruel irony. Statins reduce GLP-1. Reduced GLP-1 worsens blood sugar control. And can you guess what is the hottest, most profitable class of medications sweeping the pharmaceutical market today? Yes, GLP-1 agonists, the very medication designed to mimic or replace the hormone that statins suppress. Ozempic, Wegovy, and other GLP-1 agonists are being celebrated as miracle solutions for diabetes and obesity. But when seen in this context, they are little more than the second act of a cynical play. One med undermines a natural system, and another, far more expensive med, is sold to patch over the damage. In just a few short years, GLP-1 agonists have exploded in popularity. Semaglutide, the compound behind Ozempic and Wegovy, has become a household name. Individuals lose weight, their blood sugar improves, their hunger diminishes, at least while the injections continue. Pharmaceutical companies have promoted these medications as game changers, and the sales projections prove it. Analysts expect annual revenues to soar into the tens of billions, surpassing even the golden age of statins. But behind the glossy marketing, the same fatal flaw persists. GLP-1 agonists do not cure disease, they merely manage it. Stop the injections, and the weight creeps back, the appetite returns, and the glucose control unravels. Side effects are common, from nausea and vomiting to gallbladder disease and even pancreatitis. And the cost is staggering, thousands of dollars per patient per year, turning long-term dependency into a pharmaceutical jackpot. Again, Norwitz's words cut to the heart of the issue. He describes the pairing of statins and GLP-1 agonists as one of the most cynical cycles in modern medicine. Sick individuals are placed on statins in the name of heart protection without full disclosure of their risks. Over time, their metabolic health collapses, often progressing to diabetes. And at that very point, they are sold the next miracle drug, which treats the very hormonal deficit the first drug helped create. It is a cycle not of prevention, but of perpetual management. A conveyor belt that begins with Big Food's ultra-processed products, continues with statins, and ends with GLP-1 injections, each step more profitable than the last, while the public remains trapped in a pharmaceutical cage. The numbers reveal the scale of the machine. Statins still bring in over $20 billion annually worldwide. GLP-1 agonists are projected to double or triple that figure in the near future, with some forecasts exceeding $50 billion per year. Together, they form a pharmaceutical juggernaut whose business model depends not on curing our disease, but on maintaining it at a manageable, profitable level. For the individual, the story plays out in the tragically predictable way. A doctor diagnoses high cholesterol and prescribes a statin. Months later, blood sugar rises. A new diagnosis appears: prediabetes, then type 2 diabetes. Another prescription follows, this time an injectable costing thousands. The weight may drop, but the side effects accumulate, and the treatment must continue indefinitely. At no point does anyone stop to ask, why did the body's natural system for controlling glucose and appetite collapse in the first place? The answer lies upstream, where the cycle truly begins. Big Food engineered a diet of refined carbohydrates, seed oils, and trans fats that warped cholesterol and glucose metabolism to begin with. Statins were then prescribed to patch the cholesterol issue, but in the process they destabilized GLP-1, worsening the metabolic collapse. That created the demand for GLP-1 agonists, the next billion-dollar patch. What results is a conveyor belt of dependency: food that makes you sick, drugs that manage the sickness, and more drugs to handle the side effects, while the public remains trapped in a pharmaceutical cage. The 2024 cell metabolism study should have been the alarm bell that shattered this cycle. It should have forced doctors and policymakers to ask whether lowering LDL cholesterol at all costs is truly the right measure of heart health. It should have placed informed consent at the center of practice, with every patient told plainly, this drug may lower your cholesterol, but it can also suppress GLP-1, increase your risk of diabetes, and harm your metabolic health. Instead, the medical system has responded with silence. Few physicians are aware of the details, fewer still change their prescribing habits, and Big Pharma marches forward selling both the poison and the antidote. This is not medicine aimed at restoring health. It is medicine designed to manage decline. It is a system where chronic disease is normalized, expected, and monetized. And it is precisely why the proper human diet, the diet our biology is adapted to, rooted in real nutrient-dense animal foods, matters more than ever. Because the only true escape from this engineered cycle of decline is not to manage disease with ever more products, but to eliminate the cause of disease altogether. And now let us see how exactly to do that, as we reveal the 3 key factors that optimize results and outcomes on the ultimate way of eating, the optimized carnivore diet.
Let's now have a look at something equally crucial, the ultimate solution to the entire health crisis.
After exposing the destructive cycle of ultra-processed foods, statins, and GLP-1 drugs, one unavoidable question emerges: what is the way out? The answer is not another prescription, not another injection, and not another engineered solution from the same industries that profit from our sickness. The answer is to return to the food that built us, the food that sustained human beings for hundreds of thousands of years before agriculture, before factories, and before the rise of chronic disease. That food is the proper human diet, embodied most clearly in the carnivore diet. The carnivore diet is not an experiment. It is not a short-lived trend. It is the oldest, most proven human diet, based on meat, fat, and animal foods that provided the dense nutrition allowing us to evolve larger brains, resilient bodies, and extraordinary endurance. What is new is not carnivore. What is new is the supermarket shelf loaded with brightly packaged industrial products designed to addict, inflame, and destroy. Unlike the pharmaceutical cycle, which manages decline and locks people into lifelong dependency, carnivore addresses the root cause. Remove the refined carbohydrates, the seed oils, and the processed grains, and blood sugar stabilizes almost overnight. Insulin resistance, the engine behind type 2 diabetes, obesity, fatty liver, and heart disease, begins to reverse. This isn't speculation. Case studies across the globe now document patients with decades of type 2 diabetes achieving remission within months of cutting out processed carbs and returning to animal-based nutrition. At the same time, triglycerides, those fat particles manufactured by the liver in response to sugar overload, plummet on carnivore. Fatty liver, which now affects nearly 1 in 3 adults worldwide, begins to clear as the liver is no longer poisoned with fructose and glucose overload.
Inflammation, the invisible spark behind everything from autoimmune disease to cardiovascular damage, drops dramatically because the diet removes the unstable omega-6 oils and chemical additives that drive oxidative stress. And while mainstream medicine insists on endless medications to manage these problems, carnivore restores the body's own balance. Energy becomes steady, mental clarity sharpens, cravings vanish, and weight loss occurs not through starvation, but through alignment with human physiology. But like any powerful tool, results depend on how it is used. According to new study findings on this topic, 3 key factors determine whether carnivore merely works, or whether it transforms lives, reverses incurable diseases, and delivers the vitality big food and big pharma don't want us to rediscover.
And friends, now let's have a look at something which changes the entire perspective about the carnivore diet. The new fiber discovery on the carnivore diet by Dr. Ken Berry.
Before stepping into Dr. Sean Baker's disturbing arrest story, let's first have a quick look at Dr. Ken Berry's groundbreaking hidden fiber discovery, as it is equally important for everyone following the carnivore diet. For decades, one of the most persistent attacks on the carnivore diet by the plant-based lobby has been the fiber argument. Critics claim that without plant fiber, our gut microbiome will collapse, leading to digestive disaster, chronic inflammation, and systemic disease. This narrative has been repeated so often, with such conviction, that even many carnivore adherents have felt a nagging anxiety. Am I missing something critical by not eating fiber? Well, we all are in for a big surprise here. Dr. Ken Berry has just obliterated this concern with a discovery so profound, so elegantly simple, that it forces us to completely rethink what we thought we knew about gut health. The conventional wisdom goes like this: dietary fiber acts as a prebiotic, fermented by gut bacteria to produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate. Butyrate is the primary fuel for colonocytes, the cells lining your colon, and it has powerful anti-inflammatory effects throughout the body. Therefore, the logic goes, without fiber, you cannot produce butyrate, and without butyrate, your gut health will deteriorate. The conclusion seems inescapable: no fiber, no healthy gut. But here's the problem with that narrative: it is demonstrably false. There is a massive, growing community of individuals thriving on carnivore diets, reporting not just stable gut health, but dramatic improvements in digestive function, resolution of inflammatory bowel diseases, elimination of bloating and constipation, and reversal of autoimmune conditions. These are not isolated anecdotes. These are consistent, reproducible outcomes across tens of thousands of people. Their success in the complete absence of plant fiber demands an explanation, and Dr. Ken Berry has provided it. Well, the answer lies in what Dr. Berry calls the hidden fiber of the carnivore diet: collagen peptides. Yes, you heard that right, collagen peptides. Animal-based foods, particularly those rich in connective tissues, skin, bones, tendons, cartilage, are loaded with collagen, a structural protein that is the most abundant protein in the animal kingdom. When we consume these foods, the collagen is broken down during digestion into highly bioavailable collagen peptides. These peptides are composed of a unique blend of amino acids, primarily glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, which are rare or absent in muscle meat and virtually non-existent in plant foods. And here is where the real magic happens. These collagen peptides are fermented by gut bacteria in exactly the same way that plant fiber is fermented. The bacteria break down the peptides and produce short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, acetate, and propionate. In other words, collagen peptides serve as a prebiotic fuel for the gut microbiome, fulfilling the exact role that fiber is supposed to play. Furthermore, it is incredible to know that the scientific evidence supporting this is remarkable. Studies have shown that a collagen-rich diet actively promotes the growth of beneficial bacterial species, particularly Bacteroides and Faecalibacterium, which are two of the most important genera associated with a healthy, resilient gut microbiome. These bacteria thrive on collagen peptides, multiplying and dominating the gut ecosystem in ways that create a robust, balanced microbial community. At the same time, collagen appears to create an environment that is hostile to pathogenic bacteria. The fermentation of collagen peptides produces metabolites that suppress the growth of harmful strains, helping to prevent dysbiosis, the imbalance of gut bacteria that underlies so many chronic diseases. This is not just about feeding the good bacteria, it is about actively crowding out the bad. But the crazy thing here is that the benefits go even further. Collagen peptides contribute directly to the integrity of our gut barrier itself. The amino acids in collagen, particularly glycine and proline, are essential building blocks for the tight junctions between our intestinal cells. These tight junctions act as gatekeepers, controlling what passes from our gut lumen into our bloodstream. When these junctions are compromised, which is a condition known as leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability, the undigested food particles, bacterial toxins, and inflammatory molecules can enter our bloodstream, triggering immune responses and systemic inflammation. Collagen peptides strengthen these tight junctions, effectively sealing the gut barrier and preventing leaky gut. This is one of the reasons why so many people with inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and other gut-related autoimmune conditions experience dramatic improvement on carnivore diets. The collagen is not just feeding their microbiome, it is rebuilding their gut lining from the inside out. Surprising as it may sound, the anti-inflammatory effects of collagen are equally profound. For individuals battling chronic gut inflammation, the transition to a collagen-rich carnivore-style diet often results in rapid and sustained reductions in inflammatory markers. The gut lining, which may have been inflamed and damaged for years or even decades, begins to heal. Symptoms like cramping, diarrhea, bleeding, and pain diminish or disappear entirely. This is not just symptom management, it is healing at the root level. And here's the beautiful irony. The very foods that the establishment has told us to avoid, fatty cuts of meat, skin on chicken, bone broth, slow-cooked shanks and oxtails, are the foods richest in the hidden fiber that our gut microbiome desperately needs. We have been told to fear these foods, to trim the fat, to discard the skin, to avoid the connective tissues. In doing so, we have been playing in the hands of the plant-based big food lobby, depriving ourselves of one of the most powerful gut-healing nutrients available.
We are eager to share the startling details related to Dr. Sean Baker's arrest.
You're advocating because I'm not willing to change my position. I should be jailed.
You should be in jail, and I will be the reason for that being illegal. Speciesism has to end. It's just like racism towards animals. Not being vegan is not okay, and Sean Baker is an animal user.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
But let's just answer one important question before that. How do we harness the hidden fiber in the carnivore diet? How do we ensure we are getting enough collagen peptides to nourish our gut microbiome? It may sound unreal, but the beauty of this discovery is that it requires no supplements, no pills, no powders. Nature has already provided everything we need. We simply have to eat the foods humans have been eating for hundreds of thousands of years. Let's have a look. Not many of us know this. Bone broth is perhaps the most concentrated and easily absorbed source of collagen. Slow simmered for hours, the bones and connective tissues release their collagen into the liquid, creating a nutrient-dense elixir that has been revered across cultures for millennia. A cup of bone broth daily can provide a substantial dose of collagen peptides, vastly supporting our gut health, joint health, skin health, and overall vitality. Slow-cooked cuts of meat are another gold mine. Beef shank, oxtail, short ribs, lamb shanks, pork hocks. These tougher, collagen-rich cuts transform into tender, gelatinous delicacies when cooked low and slow. The collagen breaks down into gelatin, which is highly digestible and maximizes the release of peptides. These are not inferior cuts, they are nutritional powerhouses. Chicken skin, whether baked, broiled, grilled, or air-fried until crispy, is another delicious source. Fish skin, particularly from fatty fish like salmon or sardines, is equally beneficial. Organ meats, especially those with connective tissue like heart and tongue, provide collagen along with a host of other nutrients. Even the thin membrane inside an eggshell, easily accessible when eating a soft-boiled egg, is pure, concentrated collagen. But friends, there is a problem we have on our hands here. As powerful as this discovery is, it also represents a huge looming threat. A threat to the fiber supplement industry, a threat to the probiotic industry, a threat to the pharmaceutical companies selling meds for IBD and gut-related autoimmune conditions. Because if people discover they can heal their guts by eating bone broth and ribeye, they will no longer need the expensive pills, the synthetic powders, or the prescriptions.
So friends, here we are. Press the like button if you found this video helpful and share it further as well. And subscribe to our channel, helping us spread the healing message further. And if you want to know what 3 changes you need to make to your existing carnivore diet to make it do all the immense healing and cure, watch the video showing up on the screen now. See you there!